We are live.
Okay, at 5:04, I'm calling to order the Finance Committee for this evening, Monday, January 13th. And if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly. Counselor Cassett,
Here.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Faulkner,
She's excused.
thank you. Counselor Lee Garcia,
Here.
Chair Romero Worth.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, and do we have changes to tonight's agenda?
Madam Chair, no changes from staff.
Okay, is there a motion from the committee? We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for this evening's meeting, and if we could get a roll call because we do have a member on Zoom.
Certainly. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, and I believe we have a number of things taken off of the consent agenda. And I'm going to turn that over to you, Director. I think I know in my head, but I'll let you do it because I know you know.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 3 items that were removed from consent for discussion. Item R, item S, and item W.
Okay, is there anything else the committee wanted to hear? R, S, and W? If not, is there a motion? We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second.
Nope. Now we have a second. Sorry, jumping ahead of myself. If we could get a roll call on that motion.
Certainly. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. So with that, we will go to our presentations and we're going to start out with some staff recognitions. And Director Oster, I believe you are going to lead us through those.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And, one moment, we're doing something a little bit special and a little bit different this evening for staff recognition. We have some guests from the Economic Development Department with us.
You know what? I'm going to ask you to speak right into that mic because of our member on Zoom and also for the public when they either watch now or watch later. I can hear you perfectly well, but if you're not talking right into that mic, we can't hear you. So thank you.
Will do. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start over. We're doing something special tonight for staff recognition. We have some guests from our Economic Development Department. We have our director, Joanna Nelson. We also have Eric Renz Whitmore and Lizzie Portillo from our Economic Development Department. And after our last meeting in December, Director Nelson reached out to me and asked if we could recognize Lizzie and Eric this evening in finance for their contributions to many areas, but in particular right now, helping us meet the encumbrance deadline of December 31st for the city's ARPA federal funding. So both Lizzie and Eric, and of course, Joanna and Director Nelson as well, were instrumental in ensuring that we met that deadline for encumbering all of the city's ARPA dollars, a large portion of which went to economic development. So with that, I'll turn it over to Director Nelson to present the awards to Eric and Lizzie.
Thank you, Director.
And one more thing about the mic, because you're a tall person, if you put it up there on the ledge, you won't have to scrouch, whatever the word is. Go down.
Okay, my diaphragm is completely open. All right, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, counselors. Thank you, Director Oster, for the opportunity to represent economic development and recognize our incredible staff. As Director Oster mentioned, as long as I've been here for the past 2 years, we have been fully focused on deploying ARPA funds. And as you know, that's not an easy feat. This has completely 100% been a team effort, working with the grants team, with Erica and her team, as well as finance, procurement, all across the board. It's been a lift. But tonight, I really would love to take a moment and recognize our staff that has been really instrumental. Lizzie Portillo has been very involved with our workforce, broadband, and our work-based learning initiatives through ARPA. And then Eric Renz Whitmore has been involved with our small business technical assistance. So I'd love to read a little bit of bios, and then Director Oster is going to give them a recognition. Lizzie Portillo, we're really lucky to have her. She holds an MBA with a focus on entrepreneurship from the University of New Mexico, Anderson School of Management. She brings a variety of experience, having worked as a process analyst while completing her degree. After graduation, Lizzie deepened her involvement in the New Mexico business ecosystem through volunteer work with the New Mexico Angels. In December of 2023, Lizzie was hired as an ED specialist with us in the Office of Economic Development. In this role, she leads key initiatives in workforce development, outdoor recreation, and broadband. Over the past year, she has played a significant role in managing the $1.8 million in ARPA federal funding, which supports various community programs. Just get ready for it. It's all coming this year as we deploy these funds. It's so exciting as we've been working with these many organizations. So lots of press releases, lots of things to celebrate coming forth in 2025. And she has a strong interest in her work and is grateful for the collaborative relationships with other city departments. And Lizzie, thank you so much. As well, I failed to mention, both Eric and Lizzie are completing 1 year of service with the city of Santa Fe and 2 years respectively. So this falls at a really great holiday and anniversary for us. So thank you, Lizzie. Can we clap, or is it like church or something? Okay.
I'm going to have you talk in the mic, so sorry.
It's my pleasure to present a certificate of appreciation to Lizzie Portillo. It says this certificate is given to Elisa M. Portillo in appreciation for performance, service, and dedication to the City of Santa Fe Finance Department. Thank you so much, Lizzie.
Thank you, Lizzie. And next up, we have Eric Renz Whitmore. And Eric and I have known each other for a long time in economic development, involved in a number of different roles around the state. Eric is well known. I knew him on Twitter well before we even met. So he is an enigma in economic development, and we're so lucky to have him at the city. He is a seasoned economic development professional with a proven track record of building communities and ecosystems that foster entrepreneurship and innovation. At UNM Arts Lab, Eric played a key role in launching New Mexico's as a leading hub for film and media production through the state's media industry strategy project. As director of New Mexico Technology Council, he championed startup growth and cross-sector collaboration in technology and science. Eric later guided Albuquerque's Economic Development Department in positioning the city as a nationally recognized hub for entrepreneurship, earning acclaim as a leader in innovation. His expertise led to his selection as an eShip champion for the Kauffman Foundation, where he contributed to shaping national strategies for entrepreneurship ecosystem building. Currently, again, we're so lucky to have him as an economic development specialist with our office. His work focuses on supporting new businesses, enhancing our communications, implementing tools and systems that connect entrepreneurs with vital resources. And again, his work has really been focused on our small business technical assistance that is rolling out that is to about $2 million that we will be getting out this year. Thank you so much, Eric. We couldn't do it without you. And congratulations on 2 years. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to present Eric Renz Whitmore with this certificate of appreciation. It says this certificate is given to Eric Renz Whitmore in appreciation for performance, service, and dedication to the City of Santa Fe Finance Department. Thank you so much, Eric.
Madam Chair, counselors, thank you so much for the opportunity to recognize our great staff. And thank you again to our finance team, including
you.
Erica and the grants team. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Director Nelson, for reaching out and flagging that these two fine people have been doing critical work for the city and we're deserving of recognition tonight. I think that's great. And thank you both for all the work you're doing, as I don't have to tell you and I don't have to tell my colleagues that ARPA dollars are really important for the community and for economic development in the city. So thank you for the work, really important. And love hearing that you're an MBA from UNM. So as a fellow alum of UNM, go Lobos. Okay, anybody have anything to add or? Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. We have one more team member that we'd like to recognize this evening. Erica Lujan, would you come down and join me at the podium? I think Eric has some special guests in the audience this evening. Wonderful. So this is Erica. I think the committee has met Erica before, but it's my pleasure to formally introduce Erica Lujan, our grant manager. Erica brings over 20 years of civil service experience to her role with a background in financials, contracts, budgeting, accounts payable, and accounts receivable. Her broad experience has given her a strong understanding of operations, and she approaches every challenge with a commitment to learning and improving. Erica values collaboration and is always open to input from others, using feedback and challenges as opportunities to make processes better. Her passion for the work she does and its positive impact on the community drives her to give her best every day. While Erica may not always have every answer right away, she is dedicated to finding solutions and supporting the City of Santa Fe's mission. Her hard work and dedication are truly appreciated by everyone who works with her. Erica also has been instrumental in meeting our ARPA deadlines. Erica joined us in September and jumped right in, just absolutely from the very get-go, from day one, helping us get our arms around ARPA reporting, federal grant reporting, completing the single audit portion of our FY24 audit. Erica and her team were instrumental in ensuring that we only had one version of our schedule of expenditures of federal awards this year. That is a huge accomplishment and really something to be commended. We are getting, as Erica's bio said, we are getting processes in place. We're streamlining. We're listening to our colleagues in other departments about how we can improve the process. And we are just so lucky to have Erica in that leadership role in the grants division, leading the positive improvement and progress that we're making with grants. So it is my pleasure to recognize Erica this evening. Thank you so much, Erica, for your hard work on ARPA, on the audit, just in general to improve grants management at the city. And I'd love to give Erica a round of applause. Well, with that, it is my pleasure to present a certificate of appreciation to Ms. Erica V. Lujan. This certificate is dedicated to Erica V. Lujan in appreciation for performance, service, and dedication to the City of Santa Fe Finance Department. Thank you so much, Erica.
You know, I really want to thank all of you. I think this isn't just a one-person effort. I think our management, all the different departments that as we see here, I think it's not just a one-man show. I think we're a great team, and I'm super excited to be a part of this team and to implement new processes abroad. And thank you so much for this honor.
Thank you. And thank you for being here tonight. Really, really critical work. We have learned this, unfortunately, the hard way. But so glad that we're meeting the deadlines and the challenges and the work, and that the processes are getting better. And just thank you for everything you're doing to help us get and keep on track. Really, really critical. And, I think we all hope that the city will be able to get more grants in the coming years for a lot of really important work. So having you in your position is going to be very important to those efforts. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Chair, one more thing. I
Okay.
just wanted to recognize Erica's family here in the audience. Thank you so much for joining us to celebrate your rock star mom and wife here. And also, I remember Erica and I met before she and Philip were married. I still think of you as Erica Dominguez, but that was a long time ago, and you have a wonderful daughter. Thank you for coming. We're glad to have you.
Yes, thank you all for coming, and thank you for all the support you give mom. So she can help us. That's critical. I can see your daughter back there smiling proudly. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight and giving us the opportunity to celebrate all of your amazing work for the city of Santa Fe.
Okay, any more? We got it.
Madam Chair, that concludes the staff recognition
Okay,
portion of our agenda.
great. Really great acknowledgements. Let's go on to the second presentation. It's the 2025 post-election economic update. And we have with us Riley White, our economic advisor to the city. I will let him introduce himself. He's also affiliated with UNM, but he also has his own consulting business. And I know he reminds us of those credentials. And so I will let you do that because you'll do it better than I will. Welcome. Is your mic on? Yes,
There it is.
yes,
There it
it's
is.
one of those funny buttons.
How about this? Does it? Whoa, there we go. Now, karaoke night to begin. All right. So thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the City Council, for having me again. It's a great honor to be here. Of course, in my day job, I'm Associate Dean of the School of Business, as well as an Associate Professor of Finance. But in this capacity, I am the president of Erebor LLC, which is a consulting firm. In this role, what we're doing and looking at the city of Santa Fe, the purpose of this today is to discuss the economic update, in particular focused on the post-election economic update. So different things than you've heard before. And I'm focusing on a deep dive in a couple particular areas. One of them is around tariffs and how they might affect the city. The other is around immigration and how that also affects the city. Both of these are big economic movers, and as a consequence are something that we have to consider. I will note that everything I'm going to say today, we don't know the magnitude of what particular policies, nor do we know nuanced details yet as to what policies will ultimately pass by the new government and the president-elect and the new Congress. But in either capacity, these do have interesting economic effects over the long run. There'll be some things we talk about that are positive, some things that are negative. But let's go forward. And with any further ado, and I know your time is valuable, I'll kind of summarize with a few quick things. So first of all, when you look at the economy as a whole, there's a few big takeaways I want to get from this slide here. One is that right now, this is still a weakening economy. We still have job growth, but our job growth is slower than where it was a year and a half ago. Now, what's really interesting about this is we do expect, particularly in the next year or 2 years, a few things will happen. One is that we expect deregulation or deregulation bills or deregulation passageways to pass through Congress in some way to simplify regulation. This has a varied series of effects. As you know, things in economics are ultimately about trade-offs. Politics is about trade-offs. So some of the things is usually when we deregulate certain parts of the economy that can improve or improve the investment horizons of these things. The other two parts that are always on the horizon are tariffs and immigration. Both of those are big generators of economic debate in the community, but most economists would argue, and speaking in this capacity, I'm very much in agreement with most economists here. Tariffs are almost universally a bad thing on the economy and a drag, and I'll explain why. And immigration policy is complicated. But immigration policy in particular does have a big effect here in Santa Fe, and that's something that I want to discuss as well. Regarding consumer spending and consumer trends, we're noticing that people in the lower and middle income deciles right now are really in a position where they're more stressed now than they were before. Credit card debt has reached an all-time high. Here in New Mexico, the average family has a credit card debt of over $6,000. So that's an incredible sum, and it is often the highest interest rating debt that we have in the economy. And so even though credit card debt as sort of a proportion, as sort of an item, is not something we think of as something that we rely on for big purchases, seeing those balances month after month and people falling behind on them. And we have seen an increase in defaults, particularly actually in the most recent fourth quarter estimates put our default rate higher than any time since about 2011 for credit card rates. So they are rising. Consumer health is declining. And that's something that we have to observe as well. But a lot of this will depend on the policies I'll talk about next. So next slide.
Hold on just a second. I
Question.
didn't want to,
Yeah.
no, I didn't want to ruin your flow. Michael in IT, is that right? Michael, is it possible to move that text screen over to the right so that it's not in the slide? The captioning. Thank you. Perfect. Really appreciate that. All right. Take it away, Mr. White. Dr. White.
Oh, thank you. Anything. Just Riley's fine. Thank you so much. The election in one chart. So ultimately, there is an interesting thing about this too. And, you look at this question, the lasting effects on inflation. And when people are polled, we asked people, or not we, but the academic community asked people, and they said, do you prefer to have prices be lower than where they are now? Or do you prefer to have higher wages at your job? And they found that the vast majority of people want prices to go down. And as a consequence as well, there's an old study there. It's really tough to read. It's really for the cheap seats. This is a study that Robert Shiller, Nobel Prize-winning economist, did back in 1998. In this, he asked the question, imagine we were faced with an economic shock and prices were to go up 20%, which is very similar to how much prices have been up since about 2019 or so. Do you think prices should go down as a priority? And the vast majority of people, regular human beings, people who live normal lives outside of finance and economics, said, of course we want prices to drop. But when we asked economists, as you saw up there, most economists do not want prices to drop. Why is that fact? Why are we talking away from each other at these things? And that is because when prices drop, they do so because there's a demand crisis. People are no longer able to buy what's out there because we live in an economy that's based on supply and demand. When prices drop, it's a function, a symptom of a drastic loss of demand in the economy in such a catastrophic way that it only happens during the worst possible recession. And that's the really, really hard part to get across this particular language. You see economists on the news and regular people talking past one another about these issues. But it comes down to the issue of, hey, to get prices to physically lower, to be lower, apart from things like commodities like oil, which are publicly traded, or even wood, or commodities like other things that the construction industry relies on. For regular consumer products, day-to-day items, unless we have a recession, unless demand is pulled out, the rug is pulled out from the economy, then those prices don't usually drop. And consumer demand has been particularly robust. And so prices went up and they've stayed up. And that's where people are feeling pain. Now, next slide. When it comes down to a few things, so one of the things that we can examine here is the question of tariffs. Now, tariffs are a really interesting thing. And, and I'm going to actually go back in time. In the 90s, most people were like, most economists in particular, we were very optimistic about free trade in general, trade between countries, all of those things. Now, we found out later, through subsequent decades of research and other things, that free trade, the rewards for free trade don't go to evenly throughout the economy. Yes, aggregate-wise, we witnessed a very extended period of economic growth. But the downside is that growth was not evenly distributed. It was disproportionately distributed to people who were able to take advantage of those things. And so tariffs on those sides are building up, and it's bipartisan. They're things everyone thinks about, and they have a lot of consequences. And so actually the example here, whether it's President-elect Trump, or even in this case, there's an example of tariffs that were imposed by President Obama back in 2009. So it's a bipartisan thing. And the 2009 tariffs, we saw a increase in what happened was a tariff was imposed on Chinese tires. And what that did was raise the price of tires across the economy by about 3%. Not the same amount as the tariff. So prices don't go up 30% because the tariff's 30%. People can buy tires from China. They can buy them from the United States. They can buy them from Canada. But when a tariff is specific for China, what that does is when you raise the price of Chinese tires, that reduces the competition for tires for all the other tires in the market. Prices go up, and they went up about 3%. Now, it did save a number of tire jobs right here, and I can't see the number from here. I don't want to misquote it. I should have brought my glasses.
Oh, 1,200, 1,200, yes.
I could just look behind me. Maybe I'll start doing that. Thank you. That would be the common sense mechanism. So the tariffs saved about 1,200 tire jobs. Those are people who wouldn't have had jobs otherwise, and so they're effective that way. But where the issue is, and when we zoom out a bit more, people bought fewer tires because of tariffs. We lost about 3,700 retail jobs because of tariffs. And so you save one sector, you harm another. And the problem is looking at the whole of the economy, as most people in economics and finance do, we look at tariffs as being a bad thing because what it does is it builds up this area and takes away from others. When we consider sort of market-wide tariffs, what that means is it does shift a lot of industries. And a lot of industries here in Santa Fe will feel those effects depending on how big or sweeping the tariffs are. How long they last is a big question as well. The big deal is we go back to the most comprehensive study done by the World Bank back in 2016. We have a little chart there. Is that you put tariffs on the economy and what they do. If there's no trade war, that's the top line. And if there's a trade war, that's the bottom line. I'm sorry, I said World Bank. This is actually the bottom line shows that basically what this means is over a period of around 5 years, this can cause a drag to the economy of about 1.5% GDP. It slows it down. It doesn't necessarily destroy the economy, doesn't blow up overnight, but it is a drag. It's a negative GDP drag because when you impose tariffs, other countries do too. Here in New Mexico, we have a $4 billion export industry. 70% of our tariffs go to Mexico, which is our largest trading partner to our south internationally. A lot of that's agricultural products and goods and services. Everything from we're large dairy producing states, so a lot of milk, a lot of meat products, other things that end up going south of the border. And so these will hit, especially tariffs in these areas, if they are comprehensive from the other side in a trade war, will hurt those corresponding economic communities. How will that affect Santa Fe? Santa Fe, of course, regional economic center. People shop here, come here, and they shop here with the discretionary money they're able to have. So if you're from northern New Mexico looking for a population center, coming down to shop, coming around to do things, wife works in retail, so she's very keen on this. She runs into customers all the time from other parts of northern New Mexico communities who spend the weekend coming down and shopping here. And so that's some of the benefit to our GRT. But again, all of this depends on how big those tariffs are, what happens, who's going to be hit with this, and will it have job effects? In essence, it will be negative, but not catastrophically so, is what I'm saying as of yet. But it will be a drag, and depending on how big it is and how long it lasts, the longer it lasts, the more severe the consequences will be. Questions about that one? One issue has been discussed as well as whether inflation is going to come back. Some things as well. We do know that price increases are typically passed along to consumers. So people are given or tariffs happen for higher rates and there's less competition in the market or another reason is that we just have to pay more for the goods and services that we have. This means that we'll pass on those increases in prices to consumers. And increased prices, ipso facto, boost things like GRT revenue for the city because a bigger basis means a bigger amount of tax. But on the other side of this, it also means that people typically start spending less, hits their bottom lines less, and particularly in that in our consumer population, our from upper middle class down to middle class and lower middle class populations, it does have a major effect on them. And so the other issue on this as well is we've got an industry that's kind of building in a lot of the rate cuts we expect the Fed to continue to make to help lower rates in the next year, but a lot of that is tenuous, meaning that if the Fed sees that inflation's coming back one way or another through policy or otherwise, they might hold on those cuts or might even raise them again. And so it's something that we're keeping an eye on, but we don't know yet because it's just too big of an unknown involving how deep and how long the policies will remain. Next slide, please. Another way to look at this, one thing that people talk about in general, one thing we don't really have an answer for, and something, this is a 50-year problem, this comes up often, is our deficit versus our national debt. When we spend more money than we have in a given year, that forms our deficit. We add up all those deficits, that becomes our national debt. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to each other, we owe it to everyone else. And right now, we've been typically, since the 90s was the last time we had a surplus in our budget, operating at a deficit. Now, this will be an issue at some point for our economy. It is not a significant one right now. But just because we're running up to debt so much and because interest rates increase, out of our federal budget, we saw the interest payments to our debt increase from 6% to 10%, as it's expected to be next year. And so we expect this is a drag kind of on taxpayer money and on money overall. And so it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Here in New Mexico, we're one of the biggest states with a percent in terms of percent of population that's employed in some type of government, federal all the way down to city. There's a lot of uncertainties going on in the next, especially the next couple of years, involving what does government efficiency mean in that sense? And what exactly are they going to cut, and what's considered critical for national infrastructure and what's not critical for national infrastructure? It is true that if Los Alamos sneezes or something, we lose people there, it will affect our economy in Santa Fe, because we are, again, regional economic center that does get people from Los Alamos, from other places that have federal jobs available to them, to come here and spend money here as well. Something to watch. Right now, this is just, we don't know the magnitude, we don't know how big. Next slide. In immigrations, across New Mexico, we have over about 200,000 immigrants. That's about 10% of our population. Now, immigrants, those are, of course, the we would call authorized immigrants. There is the question of unauthorized immigrants as well. And the existing president-elect has indicated a hardline stance on this. Across New Mexico, according to the MPI, which is the Migration Policy Institute, they estimate there's about 63,000 unauthorized immigrants in New Mexico. And they're concentrated in major cities and also places like Santa Fe. 8,000 are employed in construction, almost as many in leisure and hospitality, which of course is a big industry in our town. In the county, there isn't individual data, but I estimate we have between 3,000 and 5,000 unauthorized immigrants, and that likely increases in summertime to around 6,000 to 7,000. When we compare this as a whole and their economic impact, that's not a small number, and they do have an economic impact. These are people who live here and they work here, but they also spend money here as well. And we don't know how big the money that they spend is, but it is not insignificant, especially considering they're about 3% of the population of the state. When we look at the question of immigrants, though, in particular, it's difficult because there's been obviously discussions about what H-1B visas, other things, and all those things mean. We are living in a state with a median age of 40. That is not the youngest of states. We are getting older, year by year passes. As a consequence, we don't really have an answer to the question of how do we support a working age population in this state. So some of that comes through immigration, which is typically younger. Some of that has happened through other arrangements. But particularly our industries, and reaching out to Santa Fe specifically, leisure and hospitality, so the lower paying jobs that we have available, but also ones that are often employed by younger workers in general, often vulnerable, have a higher proportion of immigrants in that population than we see in other parts, in other industries in the state. And so when we cramp down on questions, either temporary authorizations for work or either long-term authorizations or no authorizations of work, we are going to be looking at a stricter hiring environment in Santa Fe. And what that will do is likely make it more complex for a lot of small businesses to hire workers. That has complications. Many, for instance, if you follow the National Restaurant Association, and the estimated profit margin of a restaurant is only about 3 to 5%. Even successful ones find it difficult to make money on a continuous basis. And so a lot of businesses rely on this, and it becomes a big issue, especially as we look into the next few years. So this is a factor. Again, all of this, if these effects depend on magnitudes. This isn't like, not trying to scare you, it's an important thing, but a dialogue that you can see coming on the horizon. And the question for the city of Corson, and in your wisdom, is how to anticipate this and anticipate these potential changes. Next slide, please. So looking at this as well, looking at just in general, leisure and hospitality and construction, just across the board, have seen just huge amounts of job openings available, labor shortages in these areas as well. Two particular sectors that have been hit hard. Next slide, please. So one thing as well, and I want to dive deeper in because I know Councilor Lindell had some further questions about real estate and other things. So I found some more data, and so I got some more data for you as well. But in general, so one thing is we see a lot of building going around in town, multifamilies, other places. And we see that rents are, and that helped reduce rents from increasing rapidly to rents that are still just increasing a little bit or more or less stable. Why is this way? And this is interesting. There was a great academic paper, if you're really interested in this, that looks at Finland, that came out in 2023 there, if you're really looking at something to help you fall asleep at night. But looking at these things, we look at the question of real estate as even when you build a ton of luxury units, what happens in an environment in these places is it ladders. We have this chain. We have what's called a filtering effect across the system. This means that a large number of new luxury apartments or homes or other places allows people who are moving in, who were wealthy, but living in places that a middle class or a lower class family could afford. They start moving into those units. That frees up space for middle and lower class individuals, hypothetically. Now, Santa Fe's housing market is so absolutely distorted in the way that we look at these things. The demand for living here is so wonderfully high that we're looking at just a drop in the bucket to what our needs probably are. So yes, we build a whole bunch of units, immediately fill. And are people filling those units? No, we have another influx of people with high incomes moving into those units that a middle-class family should be living in a lower. And so as a consequence, this filtering effect is very uneven around the country. And I suspect so for Santa Fe. But in theory, this has proven a very robust analysis that was recently confirmed by another paper. And so the filtering effect is out there. Basically, you build a large number of new places, build anything. And as a consequence, people move there and that frees up and potentially reduces some of that housing scarcity. And that becomes a really, really hard question. But for Santa Fe, the question is about magnitude. Building 40 units or 10 units or 30 units, drop in the bucket probably to what the housing needs actually fundamentally are. They are fundamentally in this city. And that's a very, very difficult question to answer while preserving the characteristic of Santa Fe. Next slide, please. Another thing, note historical amounts of housing unaffordability across the country, not just here, but particularly pronounced here. And this is another thing as well. Right now, this is data from Arbor. Looking at this and looking at the way that we examine the question of our affordability threshold, right now, this is about as terrible a time to buy a new home as it's ever been. So congratulations on new homeowners. It is terrible out there. Next slide. Just reiterating some economic data. And this is sort of the tendency, particularly, this is the market share of first-time home buyers as a consequence have plummeted. And so we look at the people who are buying homes and they're not first-time home buyers. First-time home buyers, they're saving money, they're trying to wait for a time for rates to come down. We've heard this over and over again. But right now, we've seen this slide now for over the last 2 decades, looking at the question of the amount of people in the market buying at home for the first time, down to 24%, which is the lowest we've seen. Next slide. All right, down for some more specific data on multifamily houses. Here in Santa Fe, multifamily prices are up around 2% this year. But looking at this in general, what we found is, okay, they've stabilized over the last year. It's choppy, they're noisy. 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom unit. I got data from rent.com, Rent Cafe, and apartments.com, both capturing slightly different segments of the market, big Venn diagram of different things. The overall market trends over time, 2024, came up higher across the board, even though we increased inventory as much as inventory was increased. But depending on the source, if you focus on the upper left, the rent.com data, whether you're a 1, 2, or 3 bedroom unit, that's leveled off substantially. Small comfort, and it is something to consider, particularly given the proportion of individuals, the size of rent and housing costs on the annual budget for a middle-income household is now about as high as we've seen it in the last few decades. This is a really, it's a relief that prices are not going up further, but at the same time, it's also discouraging that there are still tremendous affordability crises in our city as well as in other urban areas around the state. But they are very particularly pronounced here, and they are profound. Next slide. So our increases have leveled off, but they still remain high. And this is really tricky. Where we've seen housing prices drop, rents drop, are in places that have built enormous amounts of units. Places like Austin, places like Florida. They've seen the drops that we've seen down 10 or 15%. Here, we're keeping ourselves in sort of a stasis, people coming in and people going out. A lot of that's our appeal as a city to people from all over the world know the name of Santa Fe. But short-term rentals in Santa Fe they're about 2,000 units. They've also increased their revenue about 2% in the last year, indicated by dots here. Those are all the short-term rentals that are also present in town. So they're not flooding the market with short-term rentals. This is relatively stable to where we've seen it over the last 5 years. But those prices are still there and those prices are still up where they were 5 years ago, but they have leveled off substantially. We have yet to identify, we do see seasonal trends, and that's what that chart shows. So we see higher prices in summer, lower prices in winter, based on demand. Next slide, please. Now, building permits in the town, we've got a heck of a fun ride there. So apart from the wild years of 2023, when there was a enormous amount of building permits passed, our building permit levels have fallen to a level that's lower than what we've seen even between 2000, this starts in 2020, this unit, but if we have to go back to really just following the last Great Recession to see levels about where we are right now. It's a substantial amount that it's gone down by. In this level here, to give you a sense of this is private housing units in general, so it's not multifamilies. But looking at those unit levels at where they are now, it's not enough to accommodate the housing crisis that we're in. Next slide, please. And here in Santa Fe versus our New Mexico unemployment rate, Santa Fe is the choppier line on the bottom, New Mexico is the smooth line on the top. Again, what's interesting, we are seasonal. We need to be counted in the unemployment rate. You have to be looking for a job. More people are here looking for a job in summer. Conversely, our unemployment rate goes up in summer, not goes down. We have the highest amount of labor force and the highest number of people looking for a job. We've seen that even though we recovered so well following the COVID pandemic, those rates are increasing and they're increasing fairly steadily. I expect that to continue over the next year or two. Slide. Finally, putting it all together. Thank you for your patience. So slowly weakening job market, lower GDP growth on that drag. The big unknown question is, how big are these policy changes? What is the magnitude of them? How universal are they? Universal tariffs would have a major effect. More specific tariffs would probably affect us less. Sources of hope. We are a city that bases a lot of our revenues, not only from people that live here, but of course, people who travel here. The luxury and upper middle class travel market, people that come to Santa Fe for that joy and that pleasure, they're likely going to continue to do so at this time. So our tourism market, I think, is going to remain healthy. Our lodgers tax will remain healthy. Our property taxes are going to remain very healthy as a consequence of this. The only questions I have, and especially as this affects this, are how the questions of tariffs and immigration policy will ultimately move some of that GRT revenue question. But we have to also acknowledge too, and when we think of the question of unauthorized immigrants, about 49% are homeowners. And so they're not exactly a population necessarily that is low income or perceived to be low income. Many of them, about half, have greater than a high school education. And as a consequence, they do possess economic weight in the city, even though they're not counted in. And so that's kind of overall picture we have. Any questions?
Questions from the committee? Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here.
And just a moment, I'm sorry, can we take the presentation down? Just, I think,
I got a
we could-
question.
oh, you want to refer to it? Okay, sorry.
Could we go to the slide on share of median income, the Arbor?
Yes, the data.
Science?
That's a great one. Yes. Arbor Data Science,
Talking about the affordability threshold. I don't have total clarity on that slide. Could you talk about it a little bit?
median income greater than 30%. This is an interesting thing. When is something affordable or unaffordable? That's when somebody pays for a house, and kind of the gold standard is about 30% of your income level. And so this is the percentage of people who were to buy a home today with the mortgage rate as it is and the median price as it is across the. where would your affordability, how much of your income would you spend on that house? And right now, it is about 44% of your income. Now, of course, to your point, most people will not make that decision. They'll look at this and say, well, our median, if we're in a hypothetical median family going out buying real estate, will be like, oh my goodness, 44% of my income is what it would get me in a hypothetical median size home in this country. And is how much 44% is what they would end up having to pay to acquire that. Now, of course, it'd be very hard to find a lender willing to disclose that information. And that's a very good, I compliment you, Councilor Lindell, on this as well. I want to distinguish this. This is a construct. This is an index. It's not actually what's happening on the ground, because if you actually are in that situation, you'll just find there aren't houses that are within your range, or you'll end up buying less house than perhaps you might want or might need in situations.
So, yeah, I mean, it puts an odd pressure on the market. And the other thing I was sitting here thinking about is with the experience of people in California right now, disaster upon disaster upon disaster. And I don't know what the Santa Fe, I don't know how Santa Fe has absorbed people, where people come to Santa Fe from. Do they come here from Colorado? Do they come here from Texas? Do they come here from California? You know, no one can, of course, answer what these multiple disasters will mean to our marketplace, particularly here in Santa Fe. Probably Santa Fe has the potential to feel a market surge or change as opposed to other cities in the state. Maybe yes, maybe no.
It's a potential reality. I think, especially as you look to a state like California with 40 million residents, and not only those merely affected by the fires, and also looking out to the rest of outside of the LA basin, Santa Fe is always an attractive place. And to your point, Councilor Lindell, that's one of the strangest parts of housing dynamics in ours, is that we have such external demand from this. So what would it look like? So if we met that demand, hypothetically, if we extended that arrangement and said, let's say we meet everybody who wants to move here with that, the amount of building that would need to occur would be vast and likely unsupportable by existing infrastructure and existing resources. So this is the trap.
It'll be interesting to watch.
It'll be interesting to watch. That's true too. And that's why I think when we look at prices, you know, having crossed the $600,000 threshold this year, median values, they're just the amount of, no matter what the economy does, there's this much stuff that will continue to put upward pressure on. And especially since permits are down, we're not building. There's not like there's a flood of new homes, even though there's some in the county and other places we see building. It's a drop in the bucket to what's demanded. And we also, you know, we see other places, other towns in New Mexico have, we have rural flight into urban areas that happens for jobs, happens for younger folks too. Most of our counties, rural counties, are losing population and expected communities. We have seen the projections coming out from the University of New Mexico that we've run, the economics department ran, and our state is expected to lose population after 2035 very regularly, unless I can turn around. So we have these little growth areas like Santa Fe, Las Cruces, but we don't have, our state as a whole is expected to lose population. As things change. Other question?
I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Other questions from the committee? Councilor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. White. Very comprehensive. You, as always, I, you know, having a degree also in business and being a business person myself, I could stay here for hours back and forth with questions because of the economies and supply and demand. And the two major areas I think that you hit upon, you hit upon a lot, but two major themes I think that we need to be on the lookout were in tariffs and immigration. Um, ter- um, we don't know what is actually going to happen until it does. But once there's a tariff that is, passed and it goes into effect, and I think we can go back to, I can speak to what happened in my business, and you hit on it. But how long does it take once we start seeing that? Because even as of right now, you can see some of the markets that have potential tariffs that have been talked about. I've already seen it in some of those Chinese or imported stuff where they're kind of starting to add, the prices are already going up a little bit. And then even as the prices go up, what happens is that the availability of that product stops because nobody wants it unless it's already in transit. So
Exactly.
how long does it take, or how long did it take the last time that these type of things?
That's an excellent question, Councilor Garcia, and I really appreciate the spirit at which you ask it too. So this is a good question, and the short answer is it depends. So about 60% of our imports are what we call middle market goods. These are unfinished products per se. These are things that a company, like if you're building a car, they're the parts of the car. If you're building, if you're a tire company, they might be the rubber that you import or something else. These are goods that we need to fix to turn into something else. And so it depends on our supply chains. They're interesting. They're behaving differently now than they did before the pandemic because there's been adjustments. If we increase tariffs tomorrow, and it's across the board, right across the board, different industries will see different prices raising at different times. So for example, we would expect a very, let's say, perishable goods, ones that are shipped to the United States from other countries that have a fixed life on them, that we can't keep in cold storage forever, are going to be things that we see immediate increases. Because they're like, if we increase the price of bananas, for instance, right? You know that consumers pay more for bananas because we can't grow that many bananas to make up for that market in the United States. So we have to pay that tariff and that gets passed on to the consumer. With things like tires, where you've got an American market and an international market, the American manufacturers suddenly have less competition and they raise their prices, and the prices don't go up 20%, but they go up gradually. And that depends on the stock, inventory, how quickly they cycle and how quickly they go through. Long inventory items, they might not see the effects for 6 months, but I think you'll see 3 months to a year, the effects will go through the system in a very systematic way. It will depend on the industry, the supply chain, the nature of that industry, where it gets their goods and services, and all those different parts and pieces. So if you've got a widget that's mostly made in the United States, but 2%, you need this one part that comes from Germany, and that has to be part of this. Then it's likely that you're going to absorb that differently or find other suppliers. That's something that, assuming that it's not a highly priced part of that widget, that's not something that's going to increase your product's value. But we have parts from everywhere, and that's the confusing part. And so what's uncertain to me yet, though, to your point, is in a year or 2 years or 3 years, we feel it, and we feel it more, especially economically, when we also are hit by tariffs from other countries that respond. That doubles that difficulty. So now I'm dealing with not only my costs of my goods coming in being more expensive, but now my customers who exist in other countries I cannot compete in those markets. I'm priced out of them. And so I have to find a new market, an American market for that. And that takes years. So you're going to see price effects in perishable goods soon, if that happened. And you'll see price effects more 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down. But then demand also drops, as you point out. Sticks gets more expensive, people just stop buying it. They don't buy as many tires and they don't buy as many other things. And then that affects businesses too. And that lack of demand will keep that price. The price will not increase 25%, but it'll reach some stasis but the ultimate end game is that it ends up with less economic. And that's the hard part.
I think just from my perspective is that you see those sales go down, then you're also going to look at jobs going down because businesses will say they have to cut. That's
Exactly.
the bottom line.
Exactly.
Oh.
Especially, labor costs, other things, small businesses in particular. Feel those hits.
And back to your point that tariffs predominantly not that, they have an adverse effect on our economy. And not only that, but now we have our budgets and everything that we are buying and purchasing as a municipality as well. So going back to now the government,
Oh, yes.
our budgets are gonna go boom. And so we have to figure out how to mitigate that as best as possible. Thank you very much.
Of course, and much will be uncertain. And one last note is that, we haven't actually seen this this is not something we see in the modern economic sense. If it was universal and it was a long time, that would be a big effect. But the way that is done and, with the presidential power being is what it is in certain things, that it's likely some sectors would receive tariffs and not tariffs, and it would be much more jumbled. And the question is ultimately, is it something that is tariff out of principle, or is it to achieve a pragmatic goal and some trade aim or something else? Then either one of those situations can happen, but it will at least have an immediate effect. And the best bet, the point, is it's a short horizon rather than a long to achieve the goals that then you would.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we have any other questions tonight. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I lied about that. Director Oster, I think you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I do. I have one question. This one is a little bit closer to home. So we know that, I'm sorry, Councilor Cassett, did you want to?
Oh, no, I'm good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councilor. Okay, so we're aware that the state of New Mexico has achieved, record levels of revenue with a massive surplus and significant spending plans for both operations and capital. And of course, here in Santa Fe, we're the state capital. We are in the process of deploying a large amount of capital dollars, both from the state and from our own revenues for public works projects, and also the $25 million bond issue that passed. So, we have a large amount of capital dollars that we're ramping up to deploy. So the question is, how will increasing the amount of public sector spending for infrastructure projects, for example, impact the Santa Fe, the city economic picture in terms of employment, GRT, and general economic activity?
It's a very good question, Director Oster. Thank you for that question as well. So in the question of large public expenditures, we know that large public expenditures in general have positive effects on hiring, have positive effects on spending, in so much not only in terms of what they build, but then even after those projects are completed, you end up at a higher rate than where you were before. I am giving a presentation on Wednesday to the construction. And in that, there's some data that I just looked up that's something as well. Compared to 5 years ago, bid prices.
I'm going to ask you to talk into the mic.
I'm so sorry. Yes.
Because you're about to get to the crucial
I'm getting this thing.
moment.
This is right. So absolutely right. So let me just summarize that quickly. I apologize. I forgot I was not speaking on mic again. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. In this, when we look at an economy this way, we know that there are significant positive effects from spending by municipalities and governments that last years and years and years in the future. That is a fact. Right now, with the recent data that we found, there are some interesting data points. Bid prices for these types of construction projects are 40% higher now than where they were back in 2019. Construction in general, in New Mexico, surprisingly, about 20% of our construction workforce is immigrant-based. And our construction labor force in general is much older than other states' construction labor force. Our average age of our construction force is in their 40s. As opposed to some of the more youthful population. We have a very interesting dynamic. We have both simultaneously a lot of immigrants and simultaneously an older than average construction population. What this means fundamentally is it shows that we know that there is a dearth of subcontractors. And we know that these existing things along the line, so it'll have positive effects on the city, it'll have positive effects on jobs, drawing construction workers here. Now, construction workers in general, so let's say big projects in general, we know that when you have a really, really big project, like say UNM Hospital, That takes up a whole bunch of resources. And a lot of construction workers end up going there, and you have a difficult time for other construction projects that are smaller getting jobs in these areas or finding enough labor. Simultaneously, if you're looking at stricter immigration controls, if you're looking at other issues involving construction labor, I expect, given the amount of shortage that we've seen in construction labor, I expect this will be substantial in the future and potentially lead to questions of increasing costs down the line. But you asked a positive question, and I'm going to give you a positive answer, Director, because it's very good. So what happens is when you finance a large project like this, you're supplying jobs, either temporarily or over the long run. It's not just merely in the construction industry, it's a series of other industries. It's restaurants that serve the construction industry, that provide them food. It's the housing market for those contractors earning higher amounts that want to stay, that live here, that become part of our community. And it's everything else that they spend money on, retail, Lowe's, Home Depot, those type of construction entities all require. Any big project requires top-offs on projects and materials that are often sourced locally from other people when they can't get information, when they need labor, or when they can't get supplies from other places. And so you have a ripple effect through the economy that if you spend this much, it will end up with an exponential factor more of potential benefit to the community. Now, the hard part when it comes down to this is when you look at questions, we have seen such an explosive amount of cost going into this across the country. In New Mexico, we're very constrained on labor and we're very constrained on resources. And that leads to, and we are also constrained on subcontractors. We don't have competition like they do in a place in other states that surround us. You know, I was talking to a construction manager and he said, well, I've got, you know, when I put a bid out for a project, I'm competing against 14 other people. Here, you know, you're looking at a very smaller number of those resources. And as a consequence, projects are less efficiently or perhaps more expensive to run. And so we have just labor shortages, other issues that potentially add compound existing costs. And so one of the trickiest parts about any capital outlays is the management of those capital outlays in the next few years to ensure that costs are maintained to a reasonable level.
I don't know what was positive about that.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. Yes, well,
Madam Chair, may I ask a
because we
follow-up?
You were going to give us a positive answer. And
no, it wasn't. No, it was because it
I mean,
economy. There is an embedded. It does produce economic activity and growth that leads to GRT revenues. Most of all,
there we go.
Second.
There's the silver
Yes.
lining. Aha. All right, Director Oster, you had a follow-up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So even narrowing the question a little
All
bit
right.
more, so with this large investment in infrastructure projects that we're so fortunate to have, how would that affect something like availability of asphalt at the local level?
Interesting. That's a really good question, and I wouldn't have, and that depends. It's a very, very interesting question. And so I would defer because I don't know enough about that individual. That's so specific. I don't know enough about that topic to speak earnestly about that enough. I suspect that, you know, that's one thing I can probably ask some of my my colleagues in construction about that question. For resources like this, the question is timing and deadlines. It can be acquired and it can be acquired at some cost. And so if we have that or we don't have that, it's good. We have the resources needed for it. It will be obtained, but of course that the greater the demand and whether there's enough available will likely depend heavily on all that infrastructure that goes into that. So in other words, what I'm saying is, so if the asphalt that's needed is available within a 100-mile radius, it won't have an impact. If it's something they've got to import, bring on train, bring other materials, resources, do large scale. Larger contractors have connections out of state and all this other stuff, but still it's for a project of that size. It does require a significant amount of resources that might build into that cost. But I think my guess is that was also included as part of their estimation. These sort of cost bids and estimations include that kind of anticipation. Most construction.
So initially, if there was a resource shortage, you might expect prices to increase.
Right.
But over time, would you also expect growth in the industry to?
Good question. That's a very interesting question. So if there was continued pressure, what has belabored Santa Fe in particular, and actually New Mexico in particular, has been inconsistency in progress. What keeps subcontractors from coming down and staying here contractors from building here over the long run is that I have this really big job and then I won't have another really big job for 5 years, 6 years. I can't, that's not enough for me. If you're seeing the type of growth that we see in other places, in those other growth states, then that means that those contractors sit there and they say, hey, there's so much business here. I got to make infrastructure happen. I need an asphalt. And that's where we don't benefit. And that is a crisis that happens to a state that has a steady or potentially losing population, is that people don't see dollar signs there. They see, I'll run this project for you, but I'm not going to maintain it. And that becomes that's been a perennial issue for us. And so the hard part about this is the only way to ascertain or whether to do this is to see rigorous development, the type we don't really see. That would need those like asphalt and construction. I suspect, the legislature, of course, is meeting. And of course, with the budget surplus that's coming across, there'll be additional infrastructure projects. And I think particularly for those public works and other infrastructure projects that the state wants to throw money, I think this is going to continue with our surplus year after year. It's continuing to help build up a potential infrastructure of big projects for people who are in highway construction, all this other infrastructure construction. So, hey, maybe I'll stay here. But right now we're not at that. We're just not at that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. White.
Fascinating. Lots to think about. Other questions from the committee? Not seeing anything, so thank you as always for being here. As I said, lots to mull over as we enter this year. So thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chair, Madam Chair. Thank you, the rest of the council. Thank you so much, Director, having me here tonight. Good night.
You too. Okay, we have 3 items pulled from consent. We're going to start with the first one, which is item R, request for approval of construction contract with Vital Construction Group LLC in the total amount of $7,182,098.05, including NMGRT, to complete a 2-phased demolition and reconstruction of the terminal ramp at the Santa Fe Regional Airport for a 4-year term. And I believe our airport manager is not with us tonight. He's not feeling well. So I will let you fine folks introduce yourselves. And I believe Councilor Lindell, you pulled this item. So if you would just start by introducing yourselves, and then I'll let Councilor Lindell take it from there.
Okay, Madam Chair, Councilors, I'm James Gardino, Project Manager at the Santa Fe Regional Airport.
Madam Chair and Councilors, my name is Sebastian Gallegos. I'm the Project Administrator at the Santa Fe Regional Airport.
Thank you. Councilor Lindell.
Chair. Thanks for being here, guys. So this is a $7 million project, and it's going to take 4 years to do.
And if I can, Councilor Lindell, just wanted you to know I didn't realize Facilities Manager Harris is on Zoom if you need him to chime in at any point.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Sorry about, back to you guys.
So this is a 4-year project?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, it shouldn't take 4 years. What we do is we set the contract on a 4-year, and then we schedule the line up the work, and then we kind of go from there. It's easier to set it on a 4-year and then it take less than have to do an amendment and come back and present it back to you.
And that just seems like 4 years on a project out at that airport. I don't know, what is the terminal ramp?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, the ramp is where the aircraft pulls off, the commercial planes pull off of the taxiway and they park on the ramp. Our ramp is outdated and we need to reconstruct it. So we'll be redoing the entire ramp with new concrete and new markings. And it'll just...
I just got to say that there's no real building, like we're not making a building. We're just removing existing concrete, correct? And putting down new concrete.
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to do it in sections. because we're going to stay functioning and we'll have aircraft coming in and we'll stay. So we have to move all of our planes over to one area and we'll have to complete an area, and then we'll have to do another phase to where we move them over and then we complete the other. We're not able to just complete it all at once without doing different
Just-
phases.
4 years seems crazy long to me. And $7 million seems like a really lot of money for this. Who designed this?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, it was Molson Corbin's our architect engineer.
Who?
Molson Corbin?
And are they the ones that designed the terminal?
Yes, ma'am.
Counselor, if I can though, this is highly regulated, given that commercial planes are moving off of our runway into this. So it's, I would assume that the engineer had to comply with a lot of FAA or other regulatory requirements. Am I correct there? Can you help us understand the airport business?
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell. So this particular project is, the majority is covered by an FAA grant. And so they'll be covering 7 million of the project. And then we have the New Mexico State Aviation that's putting up 1 million. And then the city will be doing 137,000. Yeah, our architect engineer has to spec everything and make sure everything's in compliance. And our RFP, the people that put in, also, have to stay in compliance with. And so worth working with Molson Corbin. They actually do really good on the airfield side. So we're looking.
That I've been out there some. There's just some things with our new terminal that if that group designed it, there's some basic things that it's like, we've got one bathroom to serve how many people? There's hundreds of people there. And I don't have the ability to know what the design should be. I have no expertise in that whatsoever. But
We have Director Harris raising his hand. Can he chime in?
Sure.
Mr. Harris, did you want to add?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell. So the project itself won't last 4 years. I like to add a little extra time on the contracts for warranty work. Sometimes we have premature failures. Anything could happen, so I want to be covered time-wise on the project. So what we call the commercial ramp is the ramp that leads passengers from the terminal to the commercial aircraft. And right now, the pavement it's beyond its useful life, and we need to strengthen it. I think the last time it was done was almost 30, 40 years ago, and it was built up to a CRJ, probably a 135, which is one of the smaller aircraft. And now we're seeing aircraft upwards of CRJ 700s. So we need to significantly strengthen that pavement. So it's going to be a full reconstruct. They're going to take it all the way down to beyond the subgrade, build it up to be able to handle 160,000 pounds of aircraft, equipment, fuel trucks, and everything else.
and I'm assuming that it's being engineered to make sure that the drainage on it is proper.
Yes, in this project, we're going to rework all the drainage underneath. There's a couple culverts that run underneath. They've started to buckle. We've had asphalt areas that buckled because of the new weight of the aircraft. So if you actually go out there, and we can take you out there to see it, around the commercial ramp, the concrete portion, the asphalt has buckled because of the weight of the aircraft that we're getting in. It's constantly settling that base course and it's just pushing out. So not only are we reconstructing just that concrete portion that exists right now, we're also expanding it a good 100 to 200 more feet in either direction of the terminal and adding more commercial aircraft parking spaces.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harris. I just, had these questions about it because, it's a lot of money. And even though it's not necessarily coming out of the city's bank account, we want to make sure that we get a really, really good product on this. Like I said, there's some other things that have happened that kind of scratch my head over. But I also said that I don't have the expertise to know these things. So I would really hope that those of you that do pay a tremendous amount of attention to this so that we don't have a drainage problem or an ice up on the ground or a failure 3 years after this is done. I don't have anything else, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions on this item? If not, is there a motion?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Harris.
I'd also like to add, because of our staffing improvements, we have a lot of staff with a lot of experience with construction projects, mostly at the Sunport. Our project manager, James, and our project administrator, Sebastian. I think we can handle this project. This is a simple pavement project on the airport with some drainage stuff that we need to clean up. And it'll be a good project. It won't last 4 years. It probably won't last more than 12 months. It's going to be a heavy lift, so they're going to build a concrete plant right on the airport, and they're going to do all the pouring and mixing right on the airport. So it'll be a quick project, and we'll have a ton of eyes on it to make sure it goes smooth.
That's reassuring.
Counselor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I initially saw the amount of this, this proposal and I says, whoa. But once you do go through the breakdown, it's quite intricate and to actually estimate the costs of all of these things. I guess the only question I would have in regards to this is, I know we're approving this. Is there any instance in which they may come under that amount and or do we always hit the amount and have to approve more? I don't know.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry, I got fever. Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia. So generally, they hit the mark on projects like this. It's very detailedly planned. They got all the numbers that they need, the amount of concrete. It could get lower, it could be higher. It all depends on what we find when we start digging. Everything relies on that.
Thank you. And yes, I agree that the planes aren't getting smaller. And so I think this is an upgrade that probably very important for the safety of everyone boarding these planes. So no more questions, Madam Chair.
Right, the planes aren't getting smaller and actually the number of planes may increase as we make these improvements. And I doubt that the cost of concrete is going to go down, especially based on the presentation that we just heard. So to me, 7 million sounds like that might be just exactly where it's going to come out on. So anyway, do we have a motion on this item?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Can we get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councilor Cassett.
Yes.
Councilor Lindell. Councilor Lee Garcia.
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Director Harris, I hope you feel better soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we're going on to the next item, item S, request for approval of a wheeling rate agreement with Santa Fe County for water wheeled through the city's water transmission and distribution network to reach the county utility system. We have Jesse Roach, who's the Water Division Director, sometimes, and sometimes the interim Public Works Director, but tonight he is here in his capacity as Water Division Director. Welcome, Dr. Roach, and Counselor Lindell, you pulled this item.
Thanks for being here, Mr. Roach. I saw in the memo that we made a proposal to the county, and the county governing body did not end up approving the agreement that we presented. And there were two issues with it, as I understand. One of them, a definition of wheeled water to clarify when wheeling charges can and cannot be charged. Do you have any disagreement or consternation about the definition of wheeled water that the county is proposing?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, no, I do not. I think it was mostly for clarification purposes, and it didn't change the intent of the agreement at all.
Okay, thank you. Other part of the disagreement, or that the county could not approve, bothers me. And it's that the agreement previously could be canceled by either party with notice. And now what the county has sent back to us is that the proposed agreement will now remain in effect so long as the wheeling rate agreement is in effect.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, just a quick clarification. The the water resources agreement is what we're talking about, which was from 2016. And I guess one other point of clarification is that we had agreed with the county at a staff level on this proposed agreement, and it never made it to the Board of County Commissioners. It was bounced back to us after review by the county manager. And so that was a mistake on our part as city staff of taking this through our process before they had fully vetted it on their end.
So you and the our group and the county employees group agreed on it, and then when it went to the county manager put in this part about the contract
That's correct.
installation.
That is correct. And I would say that from our perspective, we certainly try not to enter into any agreements that we can't bow out of. And that this one is a little bit different because this wheeling agreement is essentially an extension of the water resources agreement, which itself does not have a term. So changing it so that this agreement can be terminated, if that agreement is terminated, was a concession that although we don't love it, we were willing to make that concession.
I don't love us entering into contracts that we can't cancel or terminate, or I suppose are there parts
Counselor-
of it that allow us to renegotiate?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, the format of the agreement lays out a specific framework within which we can determine the price of the wheeling fee. So that will allow it to change and be representative of the cost that we're bearing to provide that service. But I believe, I'm not sure there's anything formally in here I can look about renegotiating. But I apologize. I'll get back to you. There are some terms in here where by agreement of either, we can go back into negotiation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just, I'm not comfortable to be in a contract that goes into perpetuity. We've seen that before, and we've seen that it creates problems sometimes in the future for us. I mean, it almost seems like this agreement is, we're providing a service that, I understand that we're getting some money for it, but it's not necessarily a service that, I'm not exactly sure how it really serves, the city. So, that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you, Counselor. Dr. Roach, can you, for the public and folks who might be watching, the Water Resources Agreement, can you give us a sense of what that is and why we have it?
Yes, Madam Chair. The Water Resources Agreement really laid out the framework within which what previously had been a single utility that covered city or county customers within sort of the service area of our utility lines, how that single utility was divided into two utilities, a city utility, which would serve just predominantly customers within the city limits, and a county utility that would serve the customers that were within the county. And so there are many different aspects of that agreement, and it was most recently sort of restated in 2016. And I guess specifically, the understanding was that there are certain areas in the county that can't be reached from a water service perspective without moving water through city infrastructure to get them there. And so that agreement included a certain amount of money and a lump sum fee, and it said that that would cover wheeling fees until 2021. And so then, starting in the middle of 2021, we had an interim agreement in place, and now this is sort of a long-term agreement, which essentially is an offshoot of this sort of fundamental agreement of how these two utilities would be split and then how they would operate together moving forward.
And I mean, do you see, it says rather than an agreement that can be canceled by either party with notice, the proposed agreement will now remain in effect so long as the Water Resources Agreement is in effect. I mean, is there any scenario in which a Water Resources Agreement wouldn't be in effect, given the future of the city and the nature of our relationship with the county and the regional needs of the water users?
Madam Chair, so long as there are two utilities serving the two separate sort of areas, I would anticipate that agreement would need to be in place.
And so then this wheeled water agreement would be in place, but we kind of want that, don't we? Because if we're using our infrastructure to serve their customers, we want to be compensated for that as long as we are two separate utilities.
Madam Chair, that's correct. We're providing them a service, and we want to be fairly compensated for that service for the benefit of our ratepayers.
So, and then I think Councilor Lindell's question about renegotiation is then kind of critical, right? Because maybe the wheeling agreement that is being asked for here is something that over time we are going to want to perhaps revisit because it may not reflect the cost to the city of wheeling water or areas of the county that can't be reached.
Madam Chair, the wheeling agreement does include an agreed upon methodology for updating the wheeling rate, and that should occur up as often as every 3 years. So the city does a cost of service study, and we will have the ability to update our wheeling fee every time we do that. And I think we can do it more often if both parties are amenable to that.
Okay. And then I guess I just would ask again, is there any downside to these two agreements being in effect?
To the Water Resources Agreement and
Yeah.
the wheeling agreement?
Yeah.
Madam
I mean, if we can renegotiate the cost and it's linked to something, that will help make sure that it's appropriate to the costs of wheeling the water. I mean, again, I think, what else is there? What else should we be thinking about, and is it covered?
Madam Chair, I think one of the reasons it's hard to think about terminating this agreement is I think that in deciding to have two linked utilities, the city could stand by itself. The county needs us to some degree, and it would be an existential threat to them for us to say, we're no longer going to partner with you. And so long as we have essentially agreed to support the county in certain ways, we need to be compensated fairly for that support. And so I think those two things go hand in hand, and that this is a good agreement. It's taken us some time to put in place, and it's been a big push, and we're happy to finally have an agreement that we believe provides a fair cost associated with the service that we are providing.
I think that answer helps me understand why they want it this way. Councilor Lindell?
What's the current rate?
The rate, well, so the interim agreement was $1.40 per 1,000 gallons of water wheeled. The agreed upon rate with this agreement is $2.04 per 1,000 gallons wheeled, and the interim agreement had terms such that the difference between those will also be billed to the county retroactively back to July 2021 when we started, when the interim agreement went into effect.
Other questions from the committee? Councilor Lee Garcia.
Madam Chair, and I do understand what wheeling means, but for the record, what is wheeling to the general public? Wheeling rate, what does that mean?
Chair and Councilor Garcia, a good example for me is Hyde Park Estates. There's county customers up at Hyde Park Estates, which is near 10,000 Waves on the drive up to the ski basin. Those are county customers, but the city has water infrastructure lines all the way up to the city limits near there. The county doesn't have any way to get water to those folks. They would have to build a new pipeline. And it doesn't make sense for them to spend that level of money to take a pipeline up to those customers rather than paying us for the right to pass that water through our system. So wheeling is essentially using our pipes to get water to their customers.
Overall in the city, what is our percentage of water that's being used currently by the county residents versus the city residents?
So, Councilor Garcia, the county has their own water supply, which is the BDD, which is a shared source, and the city and the county shared the cost of that project. And the county can deliver water to many of their customers directly through BDD transmission lines. And so I would say at the moment, the county doesn't use any of the city's water, but there is sort of a paper accounting for the example of Hyde Park. That water is not likely directly coming from BDD. There could be water there that's coming from Canyon Road. But on paper, that's all BDD water that the county diverted from the river, treated, and put into the system, but then it was wheeled through our system to get that BDD water up to Hyde Park.
Thank you. So it's a kind of a use of our infrastructure. And obviously, with the challenges that we've had with our infrastructure and so on, I mean, overall, is the $2.04 that has been agreed upon, is that enough to cover our costs, or do we need more?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's an excellent question. And this agreement does lay out a procedure that's based on industry best practices, where we undertake a cost of service study to really understand what are the costs associated with the different types of service that we provide. And then we assign the portion of that to sort of this wheeling service. And so it might not be perfect, but it's the best. It's sort of best practices methodology. And every time we update that cost of service study, which we do on a regular basis, we will have the opportunity to update the wheeling fee. And that's all been agreed upon in this framework.
That's a formula or it's industry standard.
It's fairly complicated, but it is industry standard. Our financial consultant, Jason Mumm with FCS, helped us develop that. And it's a spreadsheet that breaks down all the different types of customers and all the different types of service and essentially applies those things to each other to understand for a commercial customer, how much does it cost us to provide them water? How much are they paying? And so we try and balance out so that the proper rates are, are coming from the people who are using those services.
Thank you. And again, to our best estimates, the $2.04 at this point in time should be sufficient enough to cover those costs.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that is correct, although we are currently in the process of updating our cost of service study. So that $2.04 could be updated in the next year or so. But at the moment, it's the best number that we have, and we feel comfortable that that's a fair price.
And to Councilor Lindell's point, then are we able to go back and renegotiate if we do push this through now?
Madam Chair and Councilor Garcia, and it's even better. We don't have to renegotiate. It's in the agreement that if we do a cost of service study and a different wheeling rate comes out of that cost of service study, then we just establish that as the new rate.
Does it have to come back for an additional approval from us?
It does not. It needs utility director level approval for an update to that rate, but it would not need governing body approval from either body.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. No further questions.
We have a motion?
Move to approve.
For second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Is there further discussion? Can we get a roll call, please?
Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Director Roach, for being here tonight. Okay, our last item is W. Request for approval of budget amendment resolution in the total amount of $2 million from the general fund balance to construction work in progress for site planning, development, or purchasing of a building or property for non-congregate shelter solutions. We have our Community Health and Safety Department Director, Henry Hammond Paul here. And actually, on Zoom, we have Julie Sanchez, Youth and Family Services Division Director. I don't know who pulled this item. Councilor Lee Garcia, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Hammond Paul and Director Sanchez for being here. I initially obviously pulled this because I wanted to know a little bit more about the direction in the packet. If I can get to that real quick. Excuse me, I'm still, the new software we're using is, I'm still navigating it. And so it doesn't give us any specifics. If you can go through what we're doing, we're bringing $2 million from a previous budgeted year into our current fiscal.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, yeah, that's correct. And some of this predates my time with the department, so I'll give a history to the best of my ability. And I also want to say that I don't believe Director Sanchez is with us online, but I'm able to answer questions. So I believe, I want to get the at least two budget cycles ago, this money was appropriated to purchase a building for non-congregate shelter options. There were let me see, maybe about 5 or 6 attempts to actually purchase a variety of different facilities. And Director Sanchez actually sent the list to the Quality of Life Committee, and I can forward it to this one of the failed purchases that we attempted. They failed for a number of reasons, whether they were bought by private citizens or companies, but we weren't able to purchase it. So the money kept being pushed into the next fiscal year. We now are asking to move this money into the fiscal year so that we can complete a project that we are currently underway on. And this is to expand our micro community model. I think some of you are familiar with the pallet shelters that we established at Christ Lutheran Church, I believe last year. There are 10 units there. We are hoping to use these funds and are in the process of using these funds to expand the total number of units to 90, not at that location, but at 3 locations throughout the city. None of them would have more than 30 units at them, but to expand the number from 10 up to 90, which would add 150 beds in our city for sheltering, non-congregate sheltering. And so these funds would be used to both, or not both, but for site feasibility studies, site preparation, project management, and actual purchasing of additional units to get us to the 90 because we already have a handful.
Thank you. How many, so we have 12 that are up and running at the moment. And from my recollection, I believe we purchased additional units. What is that inventory currently right now?
Currently, we have 40 total units. There's some nuance here, and I'll walk through it. They're not all the same. So we're looking to purchase an additional 50 units, which would bring the total number of units to 90. Although the ones we currently have are 8 by 8, so they're quite small. They, at max can accommodate a couple, 2 individuals. Some of the units that we're looking to purchase are for families, so they're larger units that are more expensive, but they would accommodate multiple, a family. We're also, in addition to living units, looking for bathrooms, which are a different construction or a different type of unit, as well as laundry and community facilities. Again, different types of units, think portables for schools. So 90 living units, but additional laundry, bathrooms, and usable spaces for individuals.
Thank you. So currently we have 12 that are up, an additional 40 in inventory.
We have 10 that are up,
10 are
and 10 that are up, and 30 in inventory.
Those are the smaller units, maybe the 8 by 8.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Do we have obviously, in the time that we've purchased the 40 units, we've been able to deploy 10. Do we have a plan for the 30? It seems like it's been challenging to find places or organizations because we are utilizing organizations, correct? It's not the city that's putting these up and managing them.
Sorry, Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I'm still learning the honorifics as we go through this, so bear with me, please. So we have 10 up. I would say that there was a dual function of setting up that initial 10. One was we learned a good process. The second is that we've demonstrated some good results that we want to invest in. Those 10 units, there's actually more than 10 individuals who live in them. I believe it's 14 because they're couples. We've already had, I believe, 4 individuals move from those units into permanent housing, and I believe 1 is on a waiting list. I need to double confirm those numbers, but we've seen success of these. So that's why we want to reinvest in them and grow the capacity. In terms of where. So we learned from doing it the first time, and now we are looking at 3 sites. We actually put out an RFP for additional community providers. We were looking to establish 3 sites. One, we put it out for RFP to have the public host one site, as well as having an operator, and then we would also consider having them on city-owned property. And there's a few sites that we're looking at on city property. So, yeah.
By the public host one site, what does that look like?
There'll be a community organization or company or individual who would want to host that on their own property.
Have that already, is that entity already set up?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, there was a competitive RFP for that site. There was a site selected. We're currently in the process of finalizing the operator RFP. So I think, as I understand it, we have to wait until that contract is signed before we can disclose the 2 partners who will be operating and hosting.
How many, for the site that is a potential next step, how many units would go there?
So we want to have a total of 90 units. We have 10 currently at the Christ Lutheran Church. We don't want any locations to have more than 30 units total. So it would be a max of 30 on a given site. So what is it? 80 divided by 3, give or take.
Right. Just again, and my questioning just goes because I want more information in regards to development or alternative non-congregate shelter options. And I will agree wholeheartedly that it seems like the Christ Lutheran is a good model. It is working. They're there on site pretty much 24/7, monitoring it and making sure that it is working appropriately. It gets me to wondering, you have 30 more units, why not get this 30 units deployed and then work on more? And give that some time to see how that's working.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, excellent question. I think there is an economies of scale aspect to this, which is it's quite expensive to develop sites in terms of the actual infrastructure that's needed for these. The units have to be hooked up to electrical, and the bathroom units need to be hooked up to septic. So there's kind of a bang for your buck, if you will, when we develop these to make sure that we're able to put as many units that we want, up to 30, because we don't want to have 2 big sites, but to build them out at once, we get kind of an economies of scale return there. And well, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. So potentially you got 30, 60, 90. So you have 3 sites. You're looking at 30 units at each site. Are they similar, close to each other?
Madam Chair, Councilor.
And the reason I'm asking, excuse me, sorry for the interruption. The reason I'm asking is that, that's 90, that's potentially 90 units. And I don't know what the properties look like. But is this something that, time frame? I mean, what are we looking at? Are we looking at a year, 2 years, 3 years? The cost of these pallet homes, are we getting a great deal on them? I mean, are we sale shopping right now? A lot of those questions go into my mind.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia. So, let's see, first unit locations. I believe that we are working very diligently to make sure that there's no undue impact on one given community or area in the city. This is, at least from an operational perspective and my perspective, this is these are members of our entire community and all members of our community, whether it's District 1, 2, 3, or 4, we're hoping that we can make a strong argument that all parts of the community are able to host and support our neighbors in need. So that's with regard to location. It's not like it's all going to be in one location. That's a clear enough answer. I can speak a little more to that if you need. With regard to timing, and I think this ties back to one of your earlier questions about why not start with the 30. I think so. We're adding 150 total bed spaces. Some units, so 90 units. Some of them have multiple beds in them. Give or take 150 units. We currently have in the entire shelter system here in Santa Fe 280 beds, give or take. That is like, from my estimations, about half of what the city actually needs. So the reason why we're going bigger on this 90 units, 150 beds, rather than starting with the 3 is because the city needs that in terms of straight where do people sleep. And I apologize, I forgot the last part of your question.
I think I was just questioning in regards to, you know, how long do we anticipate? You know, it's I think I've been on the governing body now for 3 years, and this came in my first year of my term, and you know, we've got 10, and so and I'd have to look back at what was appropriated, but I was in the recollection from just memory is that we purchased almost 90 units. So I've got a little bit of a discrepancy of the 40 units versus the amount that we were supposed to have purchased, and didn't purchase the amount that was allotted at that time. I wonder why. Going back to being able to deploy these and put them up, you know, I can see where they're in smaller units, they're more of a success and not as dense compact. I'm having a little bit of, if our intention is to do 3 sites of 30, that complicates things a little bit for me. And how do we, again, go to make one work? And then, I mean, if it's working, man, let's go for it. I'd rather have somebody sleeping in a pallet shelter than on the street. The rules that reside around them, whether it's, you know, wet, dry, there's a lot of questions for me. But for this specific item in regards to 2 million, blank check, so to speak, I don't know, will there be, as sites are identified and invested in, do those come back to the governing body? And that may be a question for Director Oster.
Madam Chair and Councillor Lee Garcia. So unexpended funds would return back to the general fund. So that's, you know, true of all budgeted items.
Right. I guess my question is as each site is coming forward, if we approve $2 million, is that here's $2 million, go for it type of thing?
If I can help with a question. So just to be clear about what this is a budget amendment resolution. So it's moving $2 million from one, maybe you should explain what it's moving it from one type to another type. It's also moving in fiscal years too, correct?
Madam Chair and councillors, I think Henry did a good job of explaining that this funding was originally budgeted 2 years ago for the purchase of a building to provide non-congregate shelter. The team attempted to purchase a building several times and was unsuccessful. And so now the new project that we would like to redirect the funding towards is the non-congregate shelter using the micro-community model, the pallet shelter model.
Right. So, and I think if I can, the nature of Counselor Lee Garcia's question is more like, what other approvals are going to be necessary in this project as it moves forward? So right now, we're moving money from a different fiscal year, a different purpose, into the current fiscal year for this new purpose. But as we move forward with these sites, what other things will come in front of us for approval? This isn't the end of the road, I don't think. And just am I capturing your question?
Yes.
Counselor Garcia?
So like in regards to purchasing an additional 60, well, we're trying to get 90 total, right? That's 50 more units. When that purchase is it's going to happen, or you have the money for it, does it come back to the governing body for an approval of that purchase?
Madam Chair and councilors, so the procurement process and the contract with pallet shelter have already been approved by the governing body. If this budget adjustment is approved, that would allow us to execute a purchase order to order additional pallet shelter units. So that contract is already in place, and it allows us to purchase up to 100 units.
But if I can, Counselor, but the sites have not been selected, and some of those will need approvals by the governing body. Am I correct in that?
Madam Chair, yes, I will defer to Director Hammond Paul.
Madam Chair, councilors, I would want to get you an affirmative answer, if I may. I just don't have full.
Yeah, you're not sure of the process because you're new, but I think that is part of your question, is it not, Counselor Garcia? Is this, if we approve this tonight, or the next thing we know, they're just going to pop up in places we didn't anticipate them, and you're wanting.
In a sense, yeah, and I also am still going back to needing more information of what we appropriated the last time we approved the purchase of pallet shelters. I think, was it a one-time funding from reserves? Was it did the money come from ARPA funds? Was it a grant? I just still trying to figure out that funding source, which landed it in fiscal year 2023, which then we didn't purchase the amount of pallet shelters. Which what I'm hearing is that we didn't purchase the amount of pallet shelters that initially was the goal. And so now we're having to revisit that now in 2024. And so again, I think there's a lot of things that I guess I'm just not either understanding why we didn't do things. Again, I do have concerns in the areas of, where 30 pallet shelters are going to pop up without us understanding or knowing, some of this money may go to either purchase property, it sounds like.
None of the, sorry, Madam Chair, councilors, none of the funds will be used to purchase property. It'll be on already owned city land, or they'll be hosted similar to the way they are at the Christ Lutheran Church by an organization that owns their own land. So there'll be no purchasing of property. And these funds, in addition to if there are physical assets that are being purchased, like the units, will also be used for the it's not inconsequential cost of actually developing land, right? So it's not like we can just put these down on grass. We have to make sure that the land is graded, that there's storm, drainage, runoff, like appropriate land preparation, that there are sidewalks, that there is, connection to utilities. So there's costs associated with that.
Right, site planning and development for alternative non-congregate shelter options. That's what's stated in the the summary. And so,
If I may, Counselor, I would also, I don't think these, I would, these aren't gonna, so quote unquote, pop up. There's gonna be a pretty deliberate process of engaging with the community. We have a committee that's already made up of community members and community organizations about creating engagement plans for working with communities on how these might be brought into a community. So there'll be a lengthy community engagement process, similar to the way there was with the first establishment at the Christ Lutheran Church. So I think there's a calculus we're working with, which is both expediency, but also doing things correctly. We need these units yesterday. In terms, like if we want to have people off the street, we needed these up last week. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the community is engaged appropriately and that communities have the opportunity to voice their support for this.
back to my original point is that we already have 30 units that are available now. Why we haven't deployed those yet?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, in terms of, well, we're working on getting those 30 units deployed. Part of these funds would be used to do site preparation, feasibility, project management, because we have the units, but we need to put them somewhere. So that's what some of these funds would be used for actually establishing the infrastructure needed for putting those 30 units that we currently have on a location.
We recall how that worked with our partners with Christ Lutheran, and I know you may not be the best one to answer that, but you know, did we fund the construction, the you know, all of everything that was needed to put them up, and they were the ones that are managing it?
Madam Chair and Councilor Lee Garcia, so with the Christ Lutheran site, there was an RFP issued that included the site and the support services. And it was structured so that one organization could bid on both, or two different organizations could partner. And what happened there was that the Christ Lutheran Church partnered with the LifeLink for Christ Lutheran to provide the site and the LifeLink to provide the wraparound services there at the Christ Lutheran site. There is a similar RFP that Director Hammond Paul mentioned that was issued, you know, a very similar RFP was issued later on, and that is what will be used to select the additional the additional sites that are not on city property. As Director Hammond Paul mentioned, we can't talk about the details of those procurements until they're completed, but those agreements will come through governing body. I mentioned the pallet shelter contract is already in place, but those new agreements for the additional sites and the wraparound services to support those additional sites, those are not in place yet. Those are going through an RFP, a competitive procurement process, using the same model that we used with Christ Lutheran to select the additional sites and the service providers.
Do we, and I guess I'll just ask one last question, and how do you know if the prices have changed, fluctuated from when we initially bought our first units to now?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, fortunately, well, fortunately for us, unfortunately for other cities, they did change, but we were able to lock in prices at the old rate. So I think it was a 20% or 15% increase per unit that we avoided by having a contract in place previously.
Madam Chair and Councilor Garcia, if I may add, as far as the question about how the original pallet shelters were purchased, that was using ARPA dollars. As a pilot project, we dedicated ARPA dollars to purchase the first batch of pallet shelters. We structured that contract with Pallet to allow for the purchase of additional units if it was, you know, determined to be something that the city wanted to do in the future. So That agreement is already in place and allows up to 100 units to be purchased. But as Director Hammond Paul mentioned, the units themselves are only one piece of the puzzle. There also has to be a site which has to be prepared. There are electrical requirements and grading and other, preparation that has to be done in order for a certain location to have pallet shelters. And then there also, under our RFPs, has to be wraparound services as well provided to the people that live in the pallet shelter community.
I don't know if you can verify this or not, but it was 40 shelters that were purchased.
Madam Chair and Councilor Lee Garcia, that sounds right to me. The original purchase was 40 units. We have since purchased 3 bathroom units, I believe. And then the laundry facility is another type of unit that we're looking for. So what we've learned, I guess, one of the many things that we've learned through the partnership with Christ Lutheran is that providing the shelters themselves, even with wraparound services, doesn't fully meet the needs of the community. We also need to address things like restrooms and laundry and other things that the residents need. So as we're preparing to expand to additional pallet shelter communities, we want to make sure that those needs are met.
Thank you. I just have a little bit of concern of purchasing units, and we really don't have an exact where they're gonna go and how it's gonna work. I know we do have a model, but it's only 10. And so, that's just, again, I think that this is something that is working in that one site. We are looking at deploying these units on city-owned property.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's correct.
I don't know if it's appropriate to ask or disclose where our first site is going to be, where we're looking at.
It's part of the procurement process that until we have finalized the procurement with the operator, I don't believe we're able to disclose that, but as I understand.
Do you know when that would be, when the RFP procurement process will be available to us?
I think it's in the final stages, weeks, not months.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No further questions right now.
Other questions from the committee? If not, is there a motion?
Move to approve.
I think we may have lost Councilor Cassett, so I will second. Can we get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Is Councilor Cassett excused?
Why don't you start with
Councilor Lindell?
Yes.
Councilor Lee Garcia?
No at this point, and I'll explain my vote.
Chair Romero Worth?
yes. I believe you have Councilor Cassett online.
Councilor Cassett?
Yes, I apologize. I had to care for a sick kid real fast, but yes.
Motion passes.
Councilor Lee Garcia to explain your vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few concerns in regards to the deployment and the process around putting these up. I'm not against providing shelters for people. I think that it's something that if done right, it can come with a really good benefit to those individuals that are able to use them. I think I will be asking a few more questions between now and probably Wednesday, because it's going to come up on Wednesday. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you, Director, for being here.
Thank you. All right, we are done with our consent agenda. We do not have a discussion agenda. Matters from staff.
None at this time.
Matters from the committee. Matters from the chair, our next meeting, when is our next meeting? And it's not on the agenda here. Let's see, I believe it is the 27th of
Yes.
January. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.